Okay, so, I'm from Australia, as you can probably hear. And like most Australians, and certainly like most people who grew up in Australia, I'm pretty mad on sport. So anything to do with sports, and I'm really, really excited about it. Really get into my sport. And just like everybody else, what I love about sports, certainly, I do enjoy those wonderful highlights that happen in sport, those spectacular things that change a sporting event, that moment where in a game of football or soccer, where the ball just goes past the goalie's fingertips and into the back of the net, just with seconds counting down, and we have this exciting change. Suddenly everything changes. And these spectacular moments are so exciting for everybody watching, and I'm one of those typical people who loves those moments, but if I'm honest, the truth is what I really get excited about when it comes to sport is all the stuff that goes on that leads up to that moment. And what I mean by that, when we think about a sport, any sport, whatever sport it might be, if you know sport or you speak to anybody who knows a lot about sport, they'll tell you that those spectacular moments don't just happen by accident. There are complex processes and strategies and systems in place that create the environment in which those spectacular moments can happen. And this is exactly the same when it comes to business. If we think about organizations that have spectacular innovations and have these amazing moments where they come out with this amazing innovation, and we think about how they're able to do this over and over again and it leads to success, the first company that often comes to mind is Apple. And people sort of think about Apple and they look at Apple and they wonder about how they keep coming up with these great innovations. And one thing I can tell you for sure is that when it comes to innovation, Apple doesn't just have a whole bunch of people walking around in the hallways looking out the window and saying, hey, let's come up with an iPad. That could be a good idea. They actually have highly sophisticated processes, strategies, procedures in place to ensure that they can continually and consistently innovate on a regular basis. And so what I'm really interested in is all the stuff, all of the things, the processes, the strategies, the systems, the procedures that sit and that work inside an organization to underpin the environment in which great innovation can happen. And so I've spent most of my life, most of my professional life anyway, looking at competitive strategy, how organizations are able to maintain competitive advantage over time. And the really interesting thing about that, by the way, when it comes to competitive strategy, is that competitive advantage is surprisingly easy to create. It's surprisingly easy for organizations to create a competitive advantage. What's really hard to do is to maintain and sustain that competitive advantage over time. And an organization's ability to continually innovate is proportionate always to its ability to maintain and sustain competitive advantage over time. And I come from an organization called Inventium. We're all based on science-based innovation. And what that means is we take a scientific approach to innovation. We look at what those key drivers are behind the world's most innovative organizations and understand all that stuff that goes on underneath and how it translates into sustainable, continuous innovation in organizations. We are the research engine behind BRW's most innovative companies list, and we collect data from hundreds of companies based on all of those drivers. And that helps us to understand more and more all the time about what those specific drivers are that underpin an organization's ability to be continually and sustainably innovative. This is a slide, some of the clients that we work with, and what's interesting about it is you can see an enormous diversity there. There are organizations there from banking and finance, from FMCG, services, manufacturing, government. The list goes on. And what's really interesting about that is that what we find is the drivers that underpin an organization's ability to be highly innovative are the same, no matter what the industry. They cut across industry and marketplace silos. And this is really, really helpful for organizations to understand. So I want to just direct you, I suppose, first of all, to something that Jack Welch, the former chairman of GE, once said, which I think is a brilliant quote. He said that he's convinced that if the rate of change that goes on inside an organisation is less than the rate of change that goes on outside of an organisation, then the end is in sight. It's just a matter of timing. Now, what's really interesting about that is he talks about this rate of change, that there's a rate of change going on outside your organisations. And everybody with whom you speak, I think, will probably agree that that rate of change is increasing. The rate of change is increasing, things are going faster and faster and faster. And so if that rate of change is getting faster and faster outside the organisation, it obviously becomes extremely important for the rate of change inside your organisation to be equal to or greater than that rate of change outside the organisation. And we increase this rate of change inside the organisation by looking at innovation, looking at ways that we can change the way that we're doing things. And so when it comes to that word innovation, it's so often such an elusive concept for people. It's such a foggy concept. And so I'd like to share with you today Inventium's definition of innovation, the way that we like to define innovation. We've taken the definition from the scientific community and then probably simplified it a little bit. And our definition for innovation is that innovation is change that adds value. And there are three reasons why we love this definition so much. The first one is that it's really, really easy to understand, right? It's simple. It's 4 words. Change that adds value. Anybody can understand that. The second thing is that it's relevant to all types of innovation. I spoke to you before about Apple coming up with iPads, but the truth is that in all of the work that we do, some of the most important, most beneficial and most successful innovations that we have seen for organisations are business model innovations, process innovations, service delivery methodology innovations, not just coming up with shiny new flashy products. So this definition encompasses all different types of innovation. And the third reason is that it resonates with anybody. And if you think about all of the people in your organisation and you think, how can I get a whole organisation to be innovative? Anybody can apply this definition to their work. Anybody in any organisation can say, yeah, I could do something differently. I could change something in a way that adds value. And this democratises innovation. It becomes something that people can look and say, yes, I can be innovative. I can contribute to innovation in the organisation. So what I'm going to take you through today is a process for innovation, what a best practice process might look like. And there are a couple of things that are really important when it comes to a process for innovation. The first is that it must facilitate top-down innovation. In other words, it's got to put the focus for innovation somewhere. All of your organisations, I'm sure, have visions, you have strategies that are being implemented, but the question becomes, where should you innovate? And so top-down innovation is all about coming up with what we call innovation missions, the areas on which you should focus your innovation efforts. There's no point in having an organisation that's just trying to be innovative everywhere. You'll be pulling the organisation into different directions. Innovation has to happen on strategy. And so it's extremely important that organisations define exactly what those missions are. Where are the areas of focus for innovation where we should put our effort to be more innovative? The other type of innovation that's critically important that a best practice process can facilitate is bottom-up innovation. This is the kind of innovation that happens out there amongst all the rest of the organisation. And you know, it's not so easy sometimes for senior leaders to see what's happening out on the front lines with customers or deep within the organisation. So often it's people out there, people on the front line, people dealing out there every day. So often it's these people who see the biggest opportunities for innovation, who see the biggest problems that if solved with a creative solution would be extremely beneficial to the organisation. But typically what happens is when they see these opportunities or they come up with ideas or ways that identifying problems that need to be solved, they have to go through the organizational hierarchical structure. And typically, this is a problem. Because normally, if somebody's out there in their organization and they think over here, wouldn't this be a wonderful opportunity? You know, we keep having this problem. If we could just come up with a new and exciting way, a creative way, a different way to solve this problem, that could be extremely beneficial for the organization. Typically what they do is, in most organizations that don't have an innovation process, they just go to their manager. And then it has to go up the hierarchical structure. And you can't blame the manager. The manager is looking and saying, right now I've got all these metrics I'm being measured on, this is my focus, I have to deliver on all this stuff by the end of the month. It's a great idea, it sounds like it could be something we should do, but right now, my focus is here. So please just hold that thought and get back to the task at hand. And of course, you can imagine after this happens over and over again, it creates a culture or a climate in which innovation tends to kind of stop happening. So it's really important that an innovation process is centralized. It stands alone, away from the organizational hierarchical structure. And so what I'd like to do now is take you through what that best practice process looks like for innovation. You can think about how this might work in your organizations. When we think about an innovation process, the first thing that we think about is that each step in the process has to be thought about differently. People often look at innovation, they think, oh, it's all about being divergent and broad. It's all about thinking big and being creative. And there are times during an innovation process where that is extremely important. But there are also times in a process when it's extremely important to be really focused, where divergent thinking is not what you want. You need to think about this step in a very convergent way. You need to be very specific. And so you can see up here on the screen, the diamonds represent different steps in the process where we think divergently, where it goes up to a big broad diamond, and then convergently when it comes back down again. And when we look at this process, we break it up into two different parts. The first is what we call the front end of innovation. This is where we look for all of the opportunities that might exist. It's where we come up with the ideas for how we might solve the challenges or the problems, seize the opportunities. And then there's what we call the back end, which is all about the implementation. And most organizations tend to favor one or the other, and that's an interesting thing for you to perhaps reflect on as we go through where your organization sits. But I'd like to take you through the process now, step by step, and have a look at what each step looks like. And we start the process, unsurprisingly, with an innovation mission, as I spoke about before. There's no point in having people out in the organization just innovating anywhere, so we want to be very specific about where the focus for innovation is. Where are the opportunities that we see online with our strategy? Is it to increase the customer lifetime value of this group of customers over here? If we could do that, what would that mean for the organization? If we could come up with a new and innovative way of perhaps reducing customer acquisition cost here, is that where we should focus our attention? And perhaps there's an internal one as well. Maybe staff engagement is low and there's a great opportunity for innovation to increase staff engagement levels. So these are the kinds of missions that we see. They're deliberately broad. But what most organizations do is they make a critical mistake at this point. If they identify what the mission is, they then have all sorts of assumptions about how best to achieve the mission. And they act on the assumptions. So they say, oh, if we want to reduce customer lifetime value over here, for example, we just need to offer better service with this product. So let's do that. Or if we want to increase employee engagement, it's all about creating better career paths for people. So let's do that. And this is a mistake that we see a lot. The next step in the process that's critically important is the piece that we call scan. And this is where you make no assumptions, and instead you scan the environment for where the biggest opportunities are to achieve the mission. And you do this by speaking with the customers. If these are external customers, it's doing exploratory research with the customers. If it's internal customers, perhaps a process opportunity that is your innovation mission, then you speak with the staff. You speak with the internal customers. But what you do at this point is you make no assumptions. You immediately go and you find out, where are the biggest opportunities? Where are the most profitable opportunities? And then you craft them into very specific challenges that you can solve. And this is extremely important, that we now have from something broad, mission, to something specific, challenge. And one of the things that we often see when we work on projects with our clients is that when we craft the challenges, the opportunities that they now understand are the biggest opportunities are not the opportunities that they assumed were the biggest opportunities. So had they not done that scan, they would have just gone ahead and implemented something that wasn't the most profitable or most beneficial opportunity. And once we have crafted our very specific challenge, we go out broad and we ideate. We come up with ideas, as many different ideas as we can. And we use different sorts of scientific-based methodologies to elicit creative ideas, lots of different diverse and divergent ideas from lots of different, sometimes surprising people. And then we make decisions about which ideas should go forward, which ones best meet the challenges, and which ones should be left behind, before we go back out to prototyping. And when I talk about prototyping in this context, I'm talking about lean startup methodology, which some of you might be familiar with. But this is the idea that, this isn't prototyping, we just build a small version of what we want to execute. Instead, it's understanding what are the big assumptions, what are the big hypotheses that we hold about this innovation. Let's go and test those quickly and cheaply before we go to implementation. And then once we've implemented, we go out and we promote. Obviously, if it's customer, we go promote it externally, but it's also extremely important to think about promotion internally. But in the short time we have together, I just want to point you in the direction of two things relating to this process. One in the front end and one in the back end. And these are the two areas that we see organizations make the biggest mistakes. The first one is they jump straight from mission to ideate. They say, we've got an opportunity. I think, what we need to do is we need to improve our customer lifetime value, to use that example from before. Let's see how we can do that. You know what we'll do? We'll get a whole bunch of people from inside our company, we'll stand around a whiteboard, and we'll come up with all the ideas of how to do that. They don't go out, they don't actually understand from a customer's perspective where the biggest opportunities are for them to increase, for example, customer lifetime value, or whatever else that mission might be. And in the back end, the biggest mistake we see organizations make is they go straight from decide to implement. That is, they skip out the whole prototyping bit. They make a decision about which they think is the best idea, and then they just resource it. And unfortunately, if it's not working well, what do? They put more resources into it, right? More funding, more people. Keep throwing resources until something happens. Maybe something bad happens and then we'll just sweep it under the carpet and pretend it didn't happen, which we see sometimes too. So it's so important, once we've decided on the idea, to say, well, let's see how we're going to change this idea. What do we need to do? Let's go out, let's go and test these hypotheses in the marketplace with the customers. And so when you look at those two areas, the two areas I've pointed out that we find consistently are the biggest problems when it comes to the innovation process, they're the two steps where customers are involved. They're the two steps where organizations need to go out and deal directly with the people who their innovations are going to affect. First, before they come up with the ideas, and then again, once they've come up with an idea, to understand which parts of it will resonate and which ones might not. So when we think about this innovation process, I want to just touch on a couple of different roles, 3 in fact, that are relevant to the process. These are leaders in your organization, what we call innovation champions, and finally, employees. So when we think about leaders, what's critically important is that leaders feed into the process. The top-down focus. They provide missions so that the organisation understands where its focus should be, where its innovation effort should be focused. When it comes to innovation champions, these are a group of people that we put together, that you put together in your organisation, and we call them kind of guardians of the innovation process. These are the people who become skilled at understanding how to do an environment scan, how to do lean startup methodology, how to run successful ideation sessions. These are the people then who facilitate both top-down and bottom-up innovation. When the strategy is clear and the missions have been distilled from the organisational strategy, we take these missions and we give them to the champions to go out and go through the process. But also in the organisation, when bottom-up innovation happens, when someone in the organisation sees an opportunity or a problem that would be so good to solve, then that person goes to an innovation champion, and the innovation champion takes that person through the innovation process, away from the organisational hierarchical structure. And the final group is the employees. And employees don't need to play an enormous role in the process. Generally speaking, it's just about there being a process. Of course, it would be helpful to provide them with some training, some skills in terms of coming up with how they think about problems and how they think about solutions a little bit differently. Try to give them some creative thinking so they creatively solve problems and don't just keep coming up with the same ideas and the same solutions. But essentially, what you'll find is if you install this kind of process in your organisation, you'll be surprised at how many people have how many amazing opportunities that they have identified that the organisation is not capitalising on. So just getting them involved is critically important as well. So that is a look, I guess, at a best practice innovation process. And I know that today, I think the slides from this presentation are going to be made available to all of you today. And so I put some homework on there for you, which I thought you'd all appreciate. Just a little to-do list that I thought you might want to just run through in your own way. And the first thing that I would love for you to do out of today is to look at this best practice framework that I've shown you today. Take a little bit of time to look at it, to remember what we've spoken about, and develop one for your organisation. What's going to work in your organisation where this can possibly happen? The second thing I'd love you to do is to find people in your organisation who are passionate about innovation and who potentially have some availability of resource to be able to become innovation champions and become guardians of your innovation process and drive it. It's so important to have these centralised people. Third, it would be wonderful for you to identify some innovation missions. To look at your strategy, look at your organisational strategy, your competitive strategy, and say, if we're going to execute on this, where are the areas that it would be so beneficial for us to come up with new ways of doing things or innovative ways to tackle these things? And then craft some innovation missions based on that output. And finally, start to focus on starting to develop this internal capability. I have worked with organisations who were absolutely zero on the innovation scale. Not innovative at all. No culture for innovation, no process for innovation, no capability for innovation. And yet, over a surprisingly short period of time, they have become some of the world's leading organisations when it comes to innovation. And they've done this because they have seen developing this internal capability, these internal processes, as being important. So think about the roles. What do leaders need to understand? What do we have to do to get our champions to understand how to do an environment scan? How to do lean startup prototyping? How do we run ideation sessions that actually provide great output, not just the brainstorming sessions that some of you have perhaps been to that don't always get the best outcomes? So as you go and take this information and think about it, I think what I'd love for you to do is at least understand that when it comes to this rate of change that we're talking about, this rate of change outside the organization that continually increases and increases and increases, the only way your organization is going to be able to keep up with or even get ahead of that rate of change is going to be to have focus for innovation. Have a focal point and a process that will allow you to innovate, and this will underpin your ability to have ongoing, sustainable competitive advantage, which will ultimately lead to your success. So we've got a very short time together today, but at least I've been able to show you what a best practice innovation process looks like. And I will invite you all also, if you'd like to contact me after today, I'd be more than happy to talk to you further about anything that we've spoken about today, or pass on any information or useful research pieces as well that you might be able to look at as well. So that's it from me, and I'll ask Uma to come back up. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.